There we go.
Over her shoulder. A man is a maze of brambles and darkness, and even he does not know the way. Matt snorted. Fat lot of help she was. Well, Teslin or Jolene or somebody else. It must have been somebody else. If you could only think who. The White Tower was a long way away. Jacob Cardin was right here. He found its two corpses. And so were 100 other scoundrels. Somehow, he would see those two women safely out of Ebudar. The trouble was, he did not have a clue how. He wished those bloody dice would stop and be done with it.
The apartments Jolene shared with Teslin were quite spacious, including a bedchamber for each of them, plus one apiece for their maids, and another that would have done quite well for Blarick and Fenn if Teslin could have stood to have her warders with them. The woman saw every man as a potentially rabid wolf, and there was no gainsaying her when she truly wanted something. As inexorable as Elida, she ground down whatever lay in her path. They stood as equals in every real way, certainly, but not many managed to prevail over Teslin without a clear advantage. She was at the writing table in the sitting room when Jolene entered, her pen making an awful scritch, scritch. She was always parsimonious with the ink. Without a word, Jolene swept by her and out onto the balcony, a long cage of white-painted iron. The scroll work was so tight that the men working in the garden 3 stories below would have a difficult time seeing that there was anyone within. Flowers in this region ordinarily thrived in heat, wild colors to outshine the interior of the palace, but nothing bloomed down there. Gardeners moved along the gravel walks with buckets of water, yet nearly every leaf was yellow or brown. She would not have admitted it under torture, but the heat made her afraid. The Dark One was touching the world, and their only hope a boy who was running wild. "Bread and water?" Teslin said suddenly. "Send the Cawthon boy off to the tower? If there do be changes in what we did plan, you will please inform me before telling others." Jolene felt a touch of heat in her cheeks. "Marililla needed to be set down. She lectured when I was a novice. So had Teslin, a severe teacher who held her classes with an iron grip. Just the way she spoke was a reminder, a marked warning not to go against her, equal or not. Marililla, though, stood lower. She used to make a stand in front of the class, and she would dig and dig for the answer she wanted until we stood there in front of everyone weeping with frustration. She pretended to sympathize, or perhaps she really did, but the more she patted us and told us not to cry, the worse it was." She cut off abruptly. She had not intended to say all that. It was Teslin's fault, always looking at her as if she were about to be upbraided for a spot on her dress. But she should understand. Marililla had taught her, too. "You have remembered that all this time?" Stark incredulity painted Teslin's voice. "The sisters who did teach us did only do their duty. Sometimes I do think what Elida did say of you do be right." The annoying scritch resumed. "It simply came to mind when Marililla began as if she were truly an ambassador, instead of a rebel." Jolene frowned at the garden. She despised every one of those women who had broken the White Tower and flaunted the break before all the world, them and anyone who aided them. But Elida had blundered too, horribly. The sisters who were rebels now could have been reconciled with a little effort. "What did she say of me? Teslin?" The sound of the pen continued, like fingernails scraping across a slate. Jolene went back inside. "What did Elida say?" Teslin laid another sheet atop her letter, either to blot or to shield it from Jolene's eyes, but she did not answer immediately. She scowled at Jolene, or perhaps just looked. It was difficult to say with her at times, and at last sighed. Very well. If you must know, she did say you still do be a child. A child? Jolene's shock had no effect on the other woman. Some, Teslin said calmly, do change little from the day they do put on novice white. Some do change no at all. Elida does believe you have no grown up yet, and never will. Jolene tossed her head angrily, unwilling to let herself speak. To have that said by someone whose mother had been a child when she herself gained the shawl. Elida had been petted too much as a novice, made over too much for her strength and the remarkable speed of her learning. Jolene suspected that was why she was in such a fury about Elaine and Egwene and the wilder Nynaeve, because they were stronger than she, because they had spent far less time as novices, no matter that they had been pushed ahead too fast. Why, Nynaeve had never been a novice at all, and that was completely unheard of. Since you did bring it up, Teslin went on, perhaps we should try to take advantage of the situation. What do you mean? Embracing the true source, Jolene channeled air to lift the silver pitcher on the turquoise-inlaid side table and fill a silver goblet with punch. As always, the joy of embracing Saidar thrilled her, soothing even as it exhilarated. It do be obvious, I should think. Elida's orders do still stand. Elaine and Nynaeve are to be returned to the tower as soon as found. I did agree to wait, but perhaps we should wait no longer. A pity the Alvear girl does no be with them, but two will put us back in Elida's good graces, and if we can add the Cawthon boy, I do think those three will make her welcome us as if we did come with Althor himself. And this Avienda will make a fine novice, wilder or no. The goblet floated into Jolene's hand on air, and she reluctantly released the power. She had never lost the ardor she felt the first time she touched the source. Dew melon punch was a poor substitute for Saidar. The worst part of her penance before leaving the tower had been losing the right to touch Saidar. Almost the worst part. She had said it all herself, but Elida had made it clear that if she did not make it harsh, Elida would. She had no doubt the result would have been much worse then. Her good graces? Teslin, she humiliated us for no more reason than to show the others that she could. She sent us to this fly-ridden hole as far from everything important as she could, short of the other side of the Arith Ocean, ambassadors to a queen with less power than a dozen of her own nobles, any one of whom could snatch the throne from her tomorrow if they could be bothered to. And do you want to wheedle your way back into Elida's favor? She do be the Amelin seat. Teslin touched the letter with the page lying atop it, moving the sheets a bit this way, then a bit that, as if framing her thoughts. Remaining silent for a time did let her know we are no lapdogs, but remaining silent too long could be seen as treason. Jolene sniffed. Ridiculous. When they're returned, they'll only be punished for running away, and now for pretending to be full sisters. Her mouth tightened. They were both guilty there, and those who allowed them to as well. But it made a sharp difference when one of them claimed her own Aja. By the time the green Aja finished with Elaine for that, it would be a very chastened young woman indeed who took the throne of Andor. Though it might be best if Elaine secured the Lion Throne first. Her training had to be completed either way. Jolene did not intend to see Elaine lost to the tower, whatever she had done. Do no forget joining with the rebels. Light, Teslin. They were probably scooped up just like the girls the rebels took out of the tower. Does it really matter a whit whether they begin mucking out stalls tomorrow or next year? That was surely as much as the novices and accepted with the rebels would have to face. Even the Ajas can wait to have them in hand, really. It is not as if they aren't safe. They are accepted, after all, and they certainly seem content to stay where we can reach them whenever we choose. I say let us sit where Elida put us and continue to fold our hands and hold our tongues, until she asks nicely to find out what we are doing. She did not say that she was prepared to wait until Elida found herself deposed as Swan had been. The Hall surely would not put up with the bullying and bungling forever, but Teslin was red, after all, and would not appreciate hearing that. I suppose there do be no urgency, Teslin said slowly, the unspoken but all but shouting itself. Drawing a ball-footed chair to the table with another flow of air, Jolene settled herself to convincing her companion that silence remained the best policy. Still a child, was she? If she had her way, Elida would not get so much as a word out of Ebudar until she begged for it. The woman on the table arched up as far as her bonds would allow, eyes bulging, throat corded with a piercing scream that went on and on. Abruptly, the scream was a loud, choking rasp instead, and she convulsed, shaking from wrists to ankles, then collapsed in silence. Wide-open eyes stared sightlessly at the cobwebbed basement ceiling. Giving vent to curses was irrational, but Phalion could have turned the air as blue as any stableman. Not for the first time, she wished she had Tamila here instead of Ispan. Questions were answered eagerly for Tamila, and nobody died until she was ready. Of course, Tamila enjoyed the work entirely too much, but that was beside the point. Channeling once more, Phalion gathered the woman's clothes from the filthy floor and dropped them atop the body. The red leather belt fell off, and she snatched it up by hand and slapped it back onto the pile. Perhaps she should have used other methods, but straps and pincers and hot irons were so messy. Leave the body in an alley somewhere. Slit the throat so it looks as if she was robbed. You can keep the coins in her purse. The two men, squatting on their heels against the stone wall, exchanged looks. Arnin and Nad might have been brothers by their appearance, all black hair and beady eyes and scars, with more muscles than any three men could need, but they did have sufficient brains to carry out simple orders, usually. Forgiveness, mistress, Arnin said hesitantly, but no one will believe. Do as you are told, she snapped, channeling to haul him to his feet and slam him back against the stones. His head bounced, yet that surely could do him no danger. Nad rushed to the table, babbling. Yes, mistress, as you command, mistress. When she released Arnin, he did not babble, but he staggered over without any more objections to help gather up the body like so much rubbish and carry it out. Well, it was so much rubbish now. She regretted the outburst. Letting temper take control was irrational. It did seem to be effective at times, though. After all these years, that still surprised her. "Oh, Gideon, she will not like this," Ispan said as soon as the men had gone. The blue and green beads that were worked into her many slim black braids clacked as she shook her head. She had remained in the shadows the whole time, in a corner, with a small ward woven so she could not hear. Phalion managed not to glare. Ispan was the last companion she would have chosen for herself. She was blue, or had been. Perhaps she still was. Phalion did not really think herself any less white Aja because she had joined the black. Blues were too fervent, tying emotion around what should be viewed with utter dispassion. Rihanna, another white, would have been her choice, though the woman did have odd, unsound notions on several points of logic. Mogideon has forgotten us, Ispan. Or have you received some private word from her? In any case, I am convinced this cache does not exist. Mogideon, she says that it does, Ispan began firmly, but her voice quickly grew warm. A store of Angreal and Sa-Angreal and Tur-Angreal. We will have some part of them. Angreal of our very own, Phalion. Perhaps even Sa-Angreal. She has promised. Mogideon was wrong. Phalion watched shock widen the other woman's eyes. The Chosen were only people. Learning that lesson had stunned Phalion too, but some refused to learn. The Chosen were vastly stronger, infinitely more knowledgeable, and quite possibly they had already received the reward of immortality, but by all evidence they schemed and fought each other as hard as two Mirandians with one blanket. Ispan's shock quickly gave way to anger. There are others looking. Would they all look for nothing? There are friends of the dark looking. They must have been sent by others of the Chosen. If the Chosen look, can you still say there is nothing? She would not see. If a thing could not be found, the most obvious reason was that it was not there. Phalion waited. Ispan was not stupid, only awestruck, and Phalion did believe in making people teach themselves what they should already be aware of. Lazy minds needed to be exercised. Ispan paced, swishing her skirts and frowning at the dust and old cobwebs. This place smells, and it. She shuddered as a large black cockroach went skittering up the wall. The glow surrounded her for a moment. A flow squashed the beetle with a popping sound. Making a face, Ispan wiped her hands on her skirts as if she had used them instead of the power. She had a delicate stomach, though fortunately not when she could remove herself from the actual deed. I will not report the failure to one of the chosen, Phalian. She would make us envy Leandrin, yes? Phalian did not quite shiver. She did, however, cross the basement and pour herself a cup of plum punch. The plums had been old and the punch was too sweet, but her hands remained steady. Fear of Mogedion was perfectly sensible, but yielding to fear was not. Perhaps the woman was dead. Surely she would have summoned them by now, else, or snatched them sleeping into Tel Riod again to tell her why they had not yet carried out her commands. Until she saw a body, though, the only logical choice was to continue as if Mogedion would appear any moment. There is a way. How? Put every wise woman in Ebudar to the question? How many are there? 100? 200, perhaps? The sisters in the Tarasin Palace, they would notice this, I think. Forget your dreams of owning a Sa'angreal, Ispan. There is no long-hidden storehouse, no secret basement beneath a palace. Phalian spoke in cool, measured tones, perhaps more measured the more agitated Ispan became. She'd always enjoyed mesmerizing a class of novices with the sound of her voice. Almost all of the wise women are wilders, highly unlikely to know what we wish to learn. No wilder has ever been found keeping an angreal, much less a sa'angreal, and they surely would have been found. On the contrary, by every record, a wilder who discovers any object ties to the power rids herself of it as soon as possible for fear of attracting the wrath of the White Tower. Women who are put out of the tower, on the other hand, seem not to have the same fear. As you well know, when they are searched before leaving, fully 1 in 3 has secreted something about her person, an actual object of the power or something she believes is one. Of the few wise women who qualified present, Callie was the perfect choice. When she was put out 4 years ago, she tried to steal a small terangreal, a useless thing that makes images of flowers and the sound of a waterfall, but still an object tied to Saidar. And she tried to discover all the other novices' secrets, succeeding more often than not. If there was even a single Angreal in Ebudar, not to speak of a vast storehouse, do you think she could have been 4 years here without locating it? I do wear the shawl, Phalian, Ispan said with extraordinary asperity, and I do know all of that as well as you. You said there was another way. What way? She simply would not apply her brain. What would please Mogedion as greatly as the cash? Ispan simply stared at her, tapping her foot. Nynaeve Almira, Ispan. Mogedion abandoned us to go chasing after her, but obviously she escaped somehow. If we give Nynaeve, and the Trakand girl for that matter, to Mogedion, she would forgive us 100 Sa'angreal, which clearly demonstrated that the Chosen could be irrational, of course. It was best, of course, to be extremely careful with those who were both irrational and more powerful than you. Ispan was not more powerful. Should have killed her as I wanted when she first appeared, she spat. Waving her hands, she stalked up and down, grime crunching loudly beneath her slippers. Yes, yes, I know. Our sisters in the palace, they might have become suspicious. We do not wish to draw their eyes. But have you forgotten Tanchico and Tyr? Where those 2 girls appear, disaster follows. I think if we cannot kill them, we should remain as far from Nynaeve Almira and Elaine Trakand as we can. As far as we can. Calm yourself, Ispan. Calm yourself. If anything, Phalian's soothing tone only seemed to agitate the other woman more. But Phalian was confident. Logic must prevail over emotion.
Sitting on an upended barrel in the sparse coolness of a narrow, shaded alley, he studied the house across the busy street. Suddenly he realized he was touching his head again. He did not have a headache, but his head felt peculiar sometimes. most often when he thought of what he could not remember. 3 stories of white plaster. The house belonged to a goldsmith who supposedly was being visited by 2 friends she had met on a journey north some years ago. The friends had only been glimpsed on arrival and not seen since. Finding that out had been easy. Finding out they were Aes Sedai, only a trifle more difficult. A lean young man in a torn vest, whistling his way down the street with no good on his mind, paused when he glimpsed him sitting on the barrel. His coat and his location in the shadows, and the rest of him, he admitted ruefully, probably looked tempting. He reached under his coat. His hands no longer possessed the strength or flexibility for sword work, but the 2 long knives he had carried for well over 30 years had surprised more than one swordsman. Maybe something showed in his eyes, because the lean young man thought better of it and whistled his way on. Beside the house, the gate that led back to the goldsmith's stable swung open, and 2 burly men appeared, pushing a barrow piled high with soiled straw and muck. What were they up to? Arnon and Nad were hardly the lads to be mucking out the stables. He would stay here until dark, he decided, then see whether he could find Carden's pretty little killer again. Once again, he pulled his hand down from his head. Sooner or later, he would remember. He did not have much time left, but it was all he did have. He remembered that much. Chapter 18. As the Plow Breaks the Earth. Seizing Saidin long enough to unknot the ward he had woven across one corner of the anteroom, Rand raised his small silver-mounted cup and said, "More tea." Lews Theron muttered angrily in the back of his head. Carved chairs, heavy with gilt, stood in paired lines to either side of a golden rising sun, 2 paces wide, set into the polished stone floor, and another tall chair so gilded it seemed entirely gold topped a small dais that was just as elaborate. But he sat cross-legged on a carpet spread for the occasion, green and gold and blue in a Tyran maze. The 3 clan chiefs seated across from him would have disliked him receiving them from a chair, even if they were offered their own. They were another maze to be trod on warily. He was in his shirt, sleeves pushed up his forearms to expose the red and gold dragon that curled around each, glittering metallically. The Aielman's Carden sword covered theirs, on the left arm alone. Perhaps the reminder of who he was, that he too had been to Roidion when the journey meant death for most men who entered. Perhaps it was unnecessary. Perhaps. Those 3 faces gave away little as they watched Marana come from the corner where she had been sealed off. Janwin's creased face could have been carved from old wood, but it always looked that way, and if his blue-gray eyes seemed stormy, so did they always too. Even his hair looked like storm clouds. He was an even-tempered man, though. Indirian and one-eyed Mandalane might have been thinking of something else, except that their unblinking gazes followed her. Lews Theron suddenly went silent, as if he too watched through Rand's eyes. Marana's ageless features revealed even less than the clan chief's. Smoothing her pale gray skirts under, she knelt beside Rand and lifted the teapot. A massive ball of gold-washed silver, with leopards for feet and handle, and another crouched on the lid. It required both of her hands, and wavered a little as she carefully filled Rand's cup. Her manner seemed to say she did this because she wanted to, for reasons of her own that none of them could begin to understand. Her manner shouted Aes Sedai louder than her face did. Was that to the good or the bad? "I do not allow them to channel without permission," he said. The clan chiefs kept silent. Marana rose and moved to kneel beside each in turn. Mandalane covered his cup with a broad hand to indicate he wanted no more. The other 2 held out theirs, blue-gray eyes and green alike, studying her. What did they see? What more could he do? Replacing the heavy teapot on the thick leopard-handled tray, she remained on her knees. "May I serve my Lord Dragon in any way else?" Her voice was self-possession itself, but after he motioned her back to her corner, after she had risen and turned, slim hands clutched at her skirts for an instant. Yet that might have been because turning brought her to face Dashiva and Narishima. The two Ashaman, to be precise, Narishima was still only a soldier, the lowest level of Ashaman, with neither the sword nor the dragon on his collar. The Ashaman stood impassively between two of the tall, golden-framed mirrors that lined the walls. At least, the younger man looked impassive, at first glance. Thumbs tucked behind his sword belt, he ignored Marana and paid little more attention to Rand or the Aielman. Yet at a second glance, you saw that his dark, too big eyes never rested, as if he expected the unexpected to leap out of the air any moment. And who could say it would not? Dashiva appeared to have his head in the clouds, his lips moved soundlessly, and he blinked and frowned at nothing. Lews Therin snarled when Rand looked at the Ashaman, but it was Marana who occupied the dead man inside Rand's head. Only a fool thinks a lion or a woman can truly be tamed. Irritably, Rand suppressed the voice to a muted buzz. Lews Therin could break through, but not without effort. Grabbing hold of Saidin, he rewove the ward that shut Marana away from their voices. Releasing the source again increased his irritation, the hissing in his head, the water drops on red coals. An echo pulsing in time with Lews Therin's mad, distant rage. Marana stood behind the barrier she could neither see nor feel, head high and hands folded at her waist, as if a shawl were looped over her arms. Aes Sedai to her toenails. She watched him and the clan chiefs with cool eyes, light brown, flecked with yellow. My sisters do not all realize how very much we need you, she had told him this morning in this very room. But all of us who swore will do whatever you ask, that would not violate the 3 oaths. He had just wakened when she came with Sorlia escorting her. Neither seemed to care at all that he was still in a robe, with only one bite taken from his breakfast bread. I have more than a little skill in negotiation and mediation. My sisters have other skills. Let us serve you as we pledged. Let me serve you. We need you, but you have some need of us, too. Ever present, Ilana lay nestled in a corner of his brain. She was weeping again. He could not understand why she wept so often. He had forbidden her to come near him unless summoned, or leave a room without an escort of maidens. The sisters who had sworn to him had been found rooms last night in the palace where he could keep an eye on them. But he had sensed tears from the moment she bonded him. Tears and a raw grief like being ripped by claws. Sometimes it was less, sometimes more, yet always there. Ilana also had told him he needed the sworn sisters, screamed it at him finally, with her face red and tears rolling down her cheeks, before literally running from his presence. And she had spoken of serving too, though he doubted that Marana's present tasks were what either had in mind. Perhaps some sort of livery would make it clear? The clan chiefs watched Marana watch them. Not so much as the flicker of an eyelash betrayed their thoughts. The wise ones have told you where the Aes Sedai stand, Rand said bluntly. Sorlia had told him they knew, but the fact would have been clear from the lack of surprise when they first saw Marana fetching curtsy. You've seen her bring the tray and pour your tea. You've seen her come and go as I say. If you want, I'll have her dance a jig. Convincing the Aiel that he was not on the end of an Aes Sedai leash was the most needed service any of the sisters could do him right now. He would have them all doing jigs if necessary. Mandalane adjusted the gray-green patch over his right eye, the way he did when he wanted a moment to think. A thick, puckered scar ran up his forehead from behind the leather patch and halfway across his mostly bald head. When he finally spoke, it was only a little less blunt than Rand. Some say an Aes Sedai will do anything to have what she wants. Indirian lowered heavy white brows and peered down his long nose at his tea. Of only average height for an Aielman, he was shorter than Rand by half a hand, yet everything about him seemed long. The heat of the waste appeared to have melted away every spare ounce of flesh, and a few more besides. His cheekbones stood out sharp, and his eyes were emeralds set in caves.
I do not like speaking of Aes Sedai.
His deep, rich voice was always a shock coming from that gaunt face.
What is done is done. Let the wise ones deal with them.
Better to speak of the Shido dogs, Genwin said mildly, which was almost as great a shock coming from his fierce face. Within a few months, less than half a year at most, every Shido who can be will be dead or made Gaishain. Just because his voice was soft did not mean he was. The other two nodded. Mandalane smiled eagerly. They still seemed unconvinced. The Shido had been the professed reason for this meeting, and no less important for not being the most important. Not unimportant, the Shido had made trouble long enough, just not on the same page with the Aes Sedai in his book. They did present problems, though. 3 clans joining Timolin's Miagoma, already near Kinslayer's Dagger, might well be able to do as Genwin said, but there were those who could not be made Gaishain and could not be killed. Some were more critical than others. What of the wise ones? He asked. For a moment, their faces became unreadable. Not even Aes Sedai could do that so well as Aiel. Facing the One Power did not frighten them, not where it showed at least. No one could outrun death, so Aiel believed, and 100 Aes Sedai in a rage could not make a lone Aiel lower the veil once raised. But learning that wise ones had taken part in the fighting at Dumai's Wells had hit them like watching the sun rise by night and the moon by day in a blood-red sky.
Sarinda tells me almost all of the wise ones will run with the Algaid Siswai,
Indirion said at last, reluctantly. Sarinda was the wise one who had followed him from Red Springs, clanhold of the Kodara. Or perhaps followed was not the right word. Wise ones seldom did. In any case, most of the Kodara wise ones, and the Shianda, and the Darain, would go north with the spears.
The Shido wise ones will be dealt with by wise ones.
His mouth twisted with disgust. All things change. Genwin's voice was even softer than usual. He believed, but he did not want to. Wise ones taking part in battle violated custom as old as the Aiel. Mandalane set his cup down with exaggerated care. Corahwin wishes to see Jer again before the dream ends, and so do I. Like Bael and Ruark, he had 2 wives. The other chiefs had only 1 each, except Timolin. But a widowed chief seldom remained so long. The wise one saw to that if he did not. Will any of us ever see the sun rise again in the threefold land? I hope so, Rand said slowly. As the plow breaks the earth, shall he break the lives of men, and all that was shall be consumed in the fire of his eyes. The trumpets of war shall sound at his footsteps, the ravens feed at his voice, and he shall wear a crown of swords. The prophecies of the dragon gave little hope for anything except victory over the Dark One, and only a chance of that. The prophecy of Rodion, the Aiel prophecy, said he would destroy them. The bleakness swept through the clans because of him, and ancient customs were ripped apart. Even without the Aes Sedai, small wonder if some chiefs pondered whether they were right to follow Randall Thor, dragons on his arms or no. I hope so.
May you always find water and shade,
Randall Thor, Indirion said. After they left, Rand sat frowning into his cup, finding no answers in the dark tea. Finally, he set it beside the tray and pushed his sleeves down. Piranha's eyes were intent on him, as if trying to pull out his thoughts. There was a hint of impatience about her, too. He had told her to stay in the corner unless she could hear voices. Doubtless, she saw no reason why she should not come out now the clan chiefs were gone. Come out and dig out what had been said. Do you think they believe I dance on Aes Sedai strings? He said. Young Narishima gave a start. In truth, he was a little older than Rand,
but he had the look of a boy 5 or 6 years younger. He glanced at Marana, as though she had the answer, and shifted his shoulders uncomfortably. I do not know, my Lord Dragon. The Shiva blinked and stopped murmuring to himself. Tilting his head, bird-like, he eyed Rand sideways. Does it matter, so long as they obey? It matters, Rand said. The Shiva shrugged, and Narishima frowned thoughtfully. Neither seemed to understand, yet maybe Narishima could come to. Maps littered the stone floor behind the throne on its dais, rolled or folded or spread out where he had left them. He shifted some with the toe of his boot. So much to be juggled at once. Northern Kyrian and the mountains called Kinslayer's Dagger, and the region around the city. Ilion and the plains of Moredo out to Farmatting. The island of Tarvalin and all the surrounding towns and villages. Gildan and part of Amadisia. Movement and color in his head. Lews Theron moaned and laughed in the distance. Faint, mad mutters of killing the Ashaman, killing the Forsaken, killing himself. Alana stopped weeping, cutting anguish subdued beneath the thin thread of anger. Rand scrubbed his hands through his hair, pressing hard against his temples. What had it been like to be alone inside his own skull? He could not recall. One of the tall doors opened to admit one of the maidens who were standing guard in the corridor. Ryalyn, with vivid yellow-red hair and a grin for everything, actually managed to appear plump. For a maiden, anyway. Verlaine Serpeyendrag and Anura Larson wish to see the Karakan, she announced. Her voice went from warm and friendly on the first name to cold and flat on the second without disturbing her grin. Rand sighed and opened his mouth to let them enter, but Verlaine did not wait. She stormed in, a somewhat calm Anura at her heels. The Aes Sedai shied slightly at the sight of Deshiva and Narishima, and stared curiously when she saw Marana standing in her corner. Not so Verlaine. What is the meaning of this, my Lord Dragon? She demanded, brandishing the letter he had delivered to her this morning. She stalked across the floor to shake it under his nose. Why am I to return to Mayenne? I have governed well here in your name, and you know it. I could not stop Kolover having herself crowned, but at least I stopped her changing the laws you made. Why am I to be sent away? And why am I told by letter, not to my face? By letter! Thanked for my services and dismissed like a clerk who's done collecting the taxes. Even furious, the first of Mayenne was one of the most beautiful women Rand had ever seen. Black hair fell in shining waves to her shoulders, framing a face to make a blind man stare. A man could easily drown in her dark eyes. Today she wore shimmering silver silk, thin and clinging, and more suited to entertaining a lover in private. In fact, had the neckline been a hair lower, she would not have been able to wear the dress in public. As it was, he was not sure she should. He had told himself, when writing that letter, that it was because he had too much to do and no time for arguing with her. The truth was, he enjoyed looking at her too much. For some reason, he had begun feeling that that was not exactly wrong, but almost. As soon as she appeared, Lews Theron gave over ranting to hum softly, the way he did when admiring a woman. Abruptly, Rand realized he was thumbing his earlobe and felt a shock. Instinctively, he knew that was something else Lews Theron did without thinking, like the humming. He pushed his hand to his side, but for an instant it wanted to rise to his ear again. Burn you, this is my body. The thought was a snarl. Mine! Lews Theron's hum stopped in surprise and confusion. Without a sound, the dead man fled, back into the deepest shadows of Rand's brain. Rand's silence had an effect. Verlaine lowered the letter, and her anger receded. A little. Eyes fixed on his, she drew a deep breath that heated his cheeks. My Lord Dragon. You know why, he cut in. Looking only at her eyes was not easy. Oddly, he found himself wishing Min were there. Very odd. Her viewings would be no help now. When you returned from that sea folk ship this morning, there was a fellow waiting on the dock with a knife.
Berlane tossed her head contemptuously. He came no closer than 3 steps. I was accompanied by a dozen of the winged guards and Lord Captain Galien. Nurella had led some of the winged guards to Demise Wells, but Galien commanded the guards as a whole. She had 800 of them in the city, aside from those who returned with Nurella. You expect me to turn tail because of a cut purse? Don't play the fool, he growled. A cut purse with a dozen soldiers around you? Color flared in her cheeks. She knew all right. He gave her no chance for protests or explanations or any other foolishness. Dobrain tells me he's already heard whispers in the palace that you betrayed Colaver. Those who supported her might be afraid to say boo to me, but they'll pay to have a knife stuck into you. And Fail, too, according to Dobrain. That was being taken care of. But they won't have a chance because you are going back to Mayenne. Dobrain will take your place here until Elaine claims the Sun Throne. She spluttered as if he had dumped cold water down her dress. Her eyes grew dangerously large. He had been glad when she stopped being afraid of him, but now he was not so sure. As she opened her mouth to explode, Anura touched her arm and her head whipped around. They exchanged a long look and Berlane's sputters subsided. She smoothed her skirts and vigorously squared her shoulders. Rand looked away hastily. Marana hovered at the edge of the ward. He wondered whether she had stepped across and dodged back. How else could she stand right on top of what she could not possibly detect? When his head turned, she moved backward until she almost touched the walls, her eyes never leaving him. By her face, she would have poured his tea every day for 10 years to hear what was being said. My Lord Dragon, Berlane said, smiling, there is still the matter of the Afan Mier. Her voice was warm honey. The curve of her lips would have sparked thoughts of kisses in a stone. The Wave Mistress Hareen is not pleased to be left sitting on her ship so long. I have visited with her a number of times. I can smooth the difficulties there, which I hardly think Lord Dobrain can. I believe the sea folk are vital to you, whether or not the prophecies of the dragon mention them. You are crucial in their prophecies, though they seem reluctant to say exactly how. Rand stared. Why was she struggling so hard to keep a difficult job that had offered few thanks from Kyrianen, even before some began wanting to kill her? She was a ruler, used to dealing with rulers and embassies, not street thugs and knives in the dark. Warm honey or no warm honey, it was not for any desire to stay near Randall Thor. She had, well, offered herself to him once. But the hard fact was that Mayenne was a small country and Berlain used her beauty as a man would a sword to keep her land from being swallowed by its more powerful neighbor, Tyr. And there, simple as that, he had it. Berlain, I don't know what else I can do to guarantee Mayenne for you, but I will write out any... Colors swirled so strongly in his head that his tongue froze. Luce Theron cackled. A woman who knows the danger and isn't afraid is a treasure only a madman would spurn. Guarantees. Bleakness engulfed honey, and anger bubbled again, cold this time. Anura plucked at Berlane's sleeve, but she paid the Aes Sedai no heed. While I sit in Mayenne with your guarantees, others will serve you. They will ask their rewards, and the service I did here will be faded and old, while theirs is bright and new. If the High Lord Wyraman gives you Ilion and asks Mayenne in return, what will you say? If he gives you Murundi and Altara and everything clear to the Arid Ocean, will you serve if it still means leaving? He asked quietly. You will be out of my sight, but not out of my mind. Luce Theron laughed again, in such a way that Rand nearly blushed. He enjoyed looking, but sometimes the things Luce Theron thought. Berlain considered him with stubborn eyes, and he could all but see the questions being toted up behind Anura's, the careful choosing of which to ask. The door opened again for Rylan. An Aes Sedai has come to see the Karakan.
She managed to sound cold and uncertain at the same time. Her name is Pt.7 Malydrin. A strikingly handsome woman swept in right behind her, iron gray hair gathered in a bun atop her head and decorated with dangling gold ornaments, and it seemed everything happened at once. I thought you were dead, Anura gasped, eyes nearly starting out of her head. Mirana darted through the ward, hands outstretched. No, Pt.7, she screamed. You mustn't harm him. You must not. Rand's skin tingled as someone in the room embraced Sayadar, perhaps more than one, and swiftly moving well clear of Berlane, he seized hold of the source, flooding himself with Sayadine, feeling it fill the Ashaman. Dashiva's face twitched as he glared from one Aes Sedai to another. Despite the power he held, Narishima grasped his sword hilt with both hands and assumed the stance called leopard in the tree, on the brink of drawing. Luce Theron snarled at killing and death. Kill them all. Kill them now. Rylan raised her veil, shouting something, and suddenly a dozen maidens were in the room, veiling, spears ready. It was hardly surprising that Berlane stood gaping as if everyone had gone mad. For someone who had caused all that, this Cadsuane seemed remarkably unaffected. She looked at the maidens and shook her head, golden stars and moons and birds swaying gently. Trying to grow decent roses in northern Gildan may be near to death, Anura, she said dryly, but it is not quite the grave. Oh, do calm down, Mirana, before you frighten someone. One would think you would have grown a little less excitable since putting off Novice White. Mirana opened and closed her mouth, looking abashed of all things, and the tingling vanished abruptly. Rand did not release Sayadine, though, nor did the Ashaman. Who are you? He demanded. What Acha? Read by Mirana's reaction, but for a Red Sister simply to walk in like this, alone, would require suicidal courage. What do you want? Pt.7's gaze lingered on him for no more than a moment, and she did not answer. Mirana's lips parted, but the gray-haired woman looked at her, raising one eyebrow, and that was that. Mirana actually reddened and lowered her eyes. Anura was still staring at the newcomer, as if at a ghost, or a giant. Without a word, Cadsuane swept across the room to the two Ashaman, dark green divided skirts swishing. Rand was beginning to get the feeling that she always moved in that rushing glide, graceful yet wasting no time, and allowing nothing to impede her. Dashiva stared her up and down and sneered. Although looking him straight in the face, she did not seem to notice, any more than she appeared to notice Narishima's hands on his sword when she put a finger under his chin, moving his head from side to side before he could jerk back. What lovely eyes, she murmured. Narishima blinked uncertainly, and Dashiva's sneer turned to a grin, but a nasty one that made his former smirk lighthearted in comparison. Do nothing, Rand snapped. Dashiva had the gall to glower at him before sullenly pressing a fist to his chest in the salute the Ashaman used. What do you want here, Cadsuane? Rand went on. Look at me, burn you! She did, turning just her head. So you are Randall Thor, a dragon reborn. I'd have thought even a child like Moraine could have taught you a few manners. Rylan put the spear from her right hand with those clutched behind her buckler, and flashed maiden hand talk. For once, none laughed. For once, Rand was sure the talk was not a joke about him. Be easy, Rylan, he said, raising a hand. All of you be easy. Cadsuane ignored the byplay, too, directing a smile to Berlane. So this is your Berlane, Anura. She is more beautiful than I had heard. The curtsy she made, bowing her head, was quite deep, yet somehow without any suggestion of obeisance, no hint that she was in any way less. It truly was a curtsy, no more. My lady first of Mayenne, I must speak with this young man, and I would retain your advisor. I've heard you've undertaken many duties here. I would not keep you from them. It was as clear a dismissal as could be, short of holding the door open. Berylane inclined her head graciously, then smoothly turned to Rand and spread her skirts in a curtsy so deep that he worried whether she would remain even as clothed as she was. "My Lord Dragon," she intoned, "I ask your kind permission to withdraw." Rand's return bow was not so practiced. "Granted, my lady first, as you wish." He offered her a hand to help her rise. "I hope you will consider my proposal." "My Lord Dragon, I will serve you wherever and however you desire." Her voice was all honey again. For Cadswain's benefit, he supposed. There was certainly no flirtation on her voice, only determination. "Remember, Hareen," she added in a whisper. When the door closed behind Berylane, Cadswain said, "It's always good to see children play. Don't you think, Marana?" Marana goggled, head swiveling between Rand and the gray-haired sister. Anora looked as though only willpower held her upright. Most of the maidens followed Berylane, apparently deciding there was to be no killing, but Rylan and 2 others remained before the door, still veiled. It might have been coincidence that there was one for each Aes Sedai. Dashiva also seemed to think any danger passed. He leaned back against the wall with a foot propped, lips moving silently, arms folded, apparently watching the Aes Sedai. Narishima frowned questioningly at Rand, but Rand only shook his head. The woman was deliberately trying to provoke him. The question was, why provoke a man she must know could still her, or kill her, without exerting himself? Luce Theron muttered the same thing. Why? Stepping onto the dais, Rand took up the dragon scepter from the throne and sat, waiting to see what would happen. The woman was not going to succeed. "Rather ornate, wouldn't you say?" Cadswain said to Anora, looking around. Aside from all the other gold, broad bands of it ran around the walls above the mirrors, and the cornices were nearly 2 feet of golden scales. "I've never known whether Karayenan or Tyrans overdo worse. But either can make an Ebudari blush, or even a tinker. Is there a tea tray? I would like some if it's fresh and hot." Channeling, Rand scooped up the tray, half expecting to see the metal corrode from the taint, and wafted it to the 3 women. Mirana had brought extra cups, and 4 still stood unused on the tray. He filled 3, replaced the teapot, and waited. It floated in midair, supported by Sayadine. 3 very different women in appearance, and 3 distinctly different reactions. Anora looked at the tray, much as one might a coiled viper, gave a tiny shake of her head, and took a small step back. Mirana drew a deep breath and slowly picked up a cup with a hand that trembled slightly. Knowing a man could channel and being forced to see it were not at all the same. Cadswain, though, took her cup and sniffed the vapors with a pleased smile. Nothing could tell her which of the 3 men had poured the tea, yet she looked across her cup straight at Rand, lounging with one leg over the arm of his chair. "That's a good boy," she said. The maidens passed shocked looks above their veils. Rand quivered. No, she would not provoke him. For whatever reason, that was what she wanted, and she would not. "I will ask one more time," he said. Strange that his voice could be that cold. Instead, he was hotter than the hottest fires of Saidin. "What do you want? Answer or leave. By the door or a window. Your choice." Again Marana began to speak, and again Cadswain silenced her, this time by a sharp gesture, without looking away from him. "To see you," she said calmly. "I am green, Alja, not red, but I have worn the shawl longer than any other sister living, and I have faced more men who could channel than any 4 reds, maybe than any 10. Not that I hunted them, you understand, but I seem to have a nose." Calmly, a woman saying she had been to market once or twice in her life. "Some fought to the bitter end, kicking and screaming even after they were shielded and bound. Some wept and begged, offering gold, anything, their very souls not to be taken to Tarvalon. Still others wept from relief, meek as lambs, thankful finally to be done with it. Life's truth they all weep at the end. There is nothing left for them but tears at the end. The heat inside him erupted in a rage. Tray and massive teapot hurtled across the room, smashing a mirror with a thunderous crash and bouncing back in a shower of glass. Half-flattened pot spraying tea, tray spinning across the floor bent double. Everyone jumped except Cadswain. Rand leaped from the dais, clutching the dragon scepter so hard his knuckles hurt. "Is that supposed to frighten me?" he growled. "Do you expect me to beg, or to be thankful, to weep?" Aes Sedai could close my hand and crush you. The hand he held up shook with fury. Marana knows why I should. The light only knows why I don't. The woman looked at the battered tea things as if she had all the time in the world. "Now you know," she said at last, calm as ever, "that I know your future and your present. The light's mercy fades to nothing for a man who can channel. Some see that and believe the light denies those men. I do not. Have you begun to hear voices yet?" "What do you mean?" he asked slowly. He could feel Luce Theron listening. The tingle returned to his skin, and he very nearly channeled, but all that happened was that the teapot rose and floated to Cadswain, turning slowly in the air for her to examine. "Some men who can channel begin to hear voices." She spoke almost absently, frowning at the flattened sphere of silver and gold. "It is a part of the madness. Voices conversing with them, telling them what to do." The teapot drifted gently to the floor by her feet. "Have you heard any?" Startlingly, Dashiva gave a raucous laugh, shoulders shaking. Narishima wet his lips. He might not have been afraid of the woman before, but now he watched her closely as a scorpion. "I will ask the questions," Rand said firmly. "You seem to forget. I am the Dragon Reborn." "You are real, aren't you?" he wondered. There was no answer. "Luce Theron?" Sometimes the man did not answer, but Aes Sedai always drew him. "Luce Theron?" He was not mad. The voice was real, not imagination, not madness. A sudden desire to laugh did not help. Cadswain sighed. "You are a young man who has little idea where he is going or why or what lies ahead. You seem overwrought. Perhaps we can speak when you are more settled. Have you any objection to my taking Marana and Honora away for a little while? I've seen neither in quite some time." Rand gaped at her. She swooped in, insulted him, threatened him, casually announced she knew about the voice in his head, and with that she wanted to leave and talk with Marana and Honora. Is she mad? Still no answer from Luce Theron. The man was real. He was. "Go away," he said. "Go away and—" He was not mad. "All of you, get out! Get out!" The Shiva blinked at him, tilting his head, then shrugged and started for the door. Cadswain smiled in such a way that he half expected her to tell him again he was a good boy, then gathered up Marana and Honora and herded them toward the maidens, who were lowering their veils and frowning worriedly. Narishima looked at him too, hesitating until Rand gestured sharply. Finally, they were all gone, and he was alone. Alone. Convulsively, he hurled the dragon scepter. The spear point stuck quivering in the back of one of the chairs, the tassels swaying. "I am not mad," he said to the empty room. Luce Theron had told him things. He would never have escaped Galena's chest without the dead man's voice. But he had used the power before he ever heard the voice. He had figured out how to call lightning and hurl fire and form a construct that had killed hundreds of Trollocs. But then, maybe that had been Luce Theron, like those memories of climbing trees in a plum orchard, and entering the hall of the servants, and a dozen more that crept up on him unawares. And maybe those memories were all fancies, mad dreams of a mad mind, just like the voice. He realized he was pacing and could not stop. felt as if he had to move or his muscles would tear him apart in spasms. "I am not mad," he panted. "Not yet. I am not." The sound of the door opening made him whirl, hoping for men. It was Rylan again, supporting a short, stocky woman in a dark blue dress, with hair more gray than not and a blunt face. A haggard, red-eyed face. He wanted to tell them to go away, to leave him alone. Alone. Was he alone? Was Luce there in a dream? If only they would leave him. Adrian Tarson was the head of the school he had founded here in Kyrian. A woman so practical, he was not sure she believed in the one power, since she could neither see nor touch it. What could reduce her to this state? He made himself turn toward her. Mad or not, alone or not, there was no one else to do what had to be done. Not even this small beauty, heavier than a mountain. "What is the matter?" he asked, making his voice as gentle as he could. Suddenly weeping, Adrian stumbled to him and collapsed against his chest. When she was coherent enough to tell her story, he felt like weeping too.
Chapter 19. Diamonds and Stars. Mirana followed closely as she dared on Cadsuane's heels, 100 questions bubbling on her tongue. But Cadsuane was not a woman whose sleeve you plucked. She decided who she noticed and when. Anura held her silence too, the pair of them drawn along in the other's wake, down the palace corridors, down flights of stairs, polished marble at first, then plain dark stone. Mirana exchanged glances with her sister Gray and felt a moment's pang. She did not know the woman really, but Anura wore the steely look of a girl on her way to the mistress of novices, determined to be brave. They were not novices. They were not children. She opened her mouth and closed it, intimidated by the gray bun bobbing ahead of her, with its dangling moons and stars and birds and fish. Cadsuane was Cadsuane. Mirana had met her once before, or at least listened to her and been spoken to when she was a novice. Sisters had come from every Aja to see the woman, filled with an awe they could not hide. Once Cadsuane Melydrin had been the standard by which every new entry into the novice books was judged. Until Elaine Trakand, none had come to the White Tower in her lifetime who could match that standard, much less surpass it. In more ways than one, her like had not walked among Aes Sedai for 1,000 years. A refusal to accept selection as a sitter was unheard of, yet it was said she had refused, and at least twice. It was said she had spurned being raised head of the Green Aja, too. It was said she once vanished from the tower for 10 years because the hall intended to raise her Amerlin. Not that she had ever spent a day more in Tar Valon than absolutely necessary. Word of Cadsuane came to the tower, stories to make sisters gape, adventures to make those who dreamed of the shawl shiver. She would end a legend among Aes Sedai, if she was not already. The shawl had graced Mirana's shoulders for over 25 years when Cadsuane announced her retirement from the world, her hair already solid gray, and everyone assumed her long dead when the Aiel War erupted another 25 years on. But before the fighting was 3 months old, she reappeared, accompanied by 2 warders, men long in the tooth, yet still hard as iron. It was said Cadsuane had had more warders over the years than most sisters had shoes. After the Aiel retreated from Tar Valon, she retired once more, but some said, more than half seriously, that Cadsuane would never die so long as even a spark of adventure remained in the world. And that is the sort of nonsense that novices babble, Mirana reminded herself firmly. Even we die eventually. Yet Cadsuane was still Cadsuane. And if she was not one of those sisters who had appeared in the city after Althor was taken, the sun would not set tonight. Mirana moved her arms to adjust her shawl and realized it was hanging on a peg in her room. Ridiculous. She needed no reminders of who she was. If only it had been someone other than Cadsuane. A pair of wise ones standing in the mouth of a crossing corridor watched them pass, cold, pale eyes in stony faces beneath their dark headscarves. Idara and Lane. Both could channel, and quite strongly. They might have risen high had they gone to the tower as girls. Catswain went by without seeming to notice the Wilders' disapprobation. Anura did, frowning and muttering, slender braids swaying as she shook her head. Marana kept her own eyes on the floor tiles. Undoubtedly it would fall to her now, explaining to Catswain the compromise that had been worked out with the Wise Ones last night, before she and the others were brought to the palace. Anura did not know, she was no part of it, and Marana had small hope that Raffella or Varen would appear, or anyone else she might somehow foist the duty onto. It was a compromise in a way, and perhaps the best that could be expected under the circumstances, yet she strongly questioned whether Catswain would see it so. She wished she did not have to be the one to convince her. Better to pour tea for those cursed men for a month. She wished she had not been so free with her tongue with young Althor. Knowing why he had made her serve tea was no balm for being sealed off from every advantage she might have gained from it. She would rather think she'd been caught in some Taviran swirling of the pattern than believe that a young man's eyes, like polished blue-gray gems, had set her babbling from pure fright. But either way, she had handed all the advantage to him on a tray. She wished wishing was for children. She had negotiated countless treaties, many of which had actually accomplished what was intended. She had ended 3 wars and stopped 24 more before they began, faced kings and queens and generals and made them see reason. Even so, she found herself promising that she would not utter one word of complaint, no matter how often that man made her play the maidservant, if only Sionid would pop around the next corner, or Masuri, or Fealdrin, or anyone at all. Light! If only she could blink her eyes and find that everything since leaving Salidar had been a bad dream. Surprisingly, Catswain led them straight to the small room that Bera and Kiruna shared, deep in the bowels of the palace, where the servants lived. A tight window set high in the wall, yet level with the paving stones of a courtyard outside, let in a little stream of light, but the room seemed murky. Cloaks and saddlebags and a few dresses hung from pegs in the cracked, yellowing plaster walls. Gouges marred the bare wooden floor, though some effort had been made to smooth them. A tiny, battered round table stood in one corner, and an equally beaten washstand in another, with a chipped basin and pitcher. Marana eyed the small bed. It did not look that much narrower than the one she was forced to share with Sionid and Masuri, 2 doors farther down. That room was larger by perhaps a pace each way, but not meant for 3. Koiran and the others, still held in the Aiel tents, probably were much more comfortable as prisoners. Neither Bera nor Kiruna was present, but Daigian was, a plump, pale woman who wore a thin silver chain in her long black hair, with a round moonstone dangling in the middle of her forehead. Her dark Kyrianan dress bore 4 thin stripes of color across the bodice, and she had added slashes in the skirts, white for her Aja. A younger daughter of one of the lesser houses, she had always minded Marana of a pouter pigeon. When Catswain entered, Daigian rose on her toes expectantly. There was only one chair in the room, little more than a stool with an excuse of a back. Catswain took that and sighed. Tea, please. 2 sips of what that boy poured, and I could have used my tongue to sole a shoe. The glow of Saidar immediately surrounded Daigian, though faintly, and a dented tin teapot rose from the table, flows of fire heating the water as she opened a small brass-bound tea chest. With no other choice for a place to sit, Marana settled onto the bed, adjusting her skirts and shifting on the lumpy mattress while she tried to order her thoughts. This might well be as important a negotiation as she had ever undertaken. After a moment, Anura joined her, perching on the lip of the mattress. I take it by your presence, Marana, Catswain said abruptly. The tales of the boys submitting to Elida are false. Don't look so surprised, child. Did you think I didn't know your associations? She gave that word such a twist it sounded as filthy as any soldier's expletive. And you, Anura? I am here only to advise Berylane, though the truth of it is, she ignored my advice by coming in the first place. The Taraboner woman held her head up, voice confident. She was rubbing her thumbs for all she was worth, though. She could not do well at the negotiating table if she was that transparent. For the rest, she said carefully, I have reached no decision as yet. A wise decision, that, Cadsuane murmured, with a pointed look at Marana. It seems that in the last few years, far too many sisters have forgotten they possess brains, or discretion. There was a time when Aes Sedai reached their decisions after calm deliberation, with the good of the tower always in the front of their thoughts. Just remember what the Sanche girl got from meddling with Althor, Anura. Walk too near a forge fire and you can be burned badly. Marana lifted her chin, working her neck to ease its tightness. Realizing what she was doing, she made herself stop. The woman did not stand that far above her. Not really. Just higher than any other sister. If I may ask, too diffident, but worse to stop and start over. What are your intentions, Cadsuane? She struggled to maintain dignity. Obviously you have been holding yourself aside until now. Why have you decided to approach Althor at this particular time? You were rather undiplomatic with him. You might as well have slapped his face, Anura put in, and Marana colored. Of the two of them, Anura should have been having the harder time with Cadsuane by far, but she was not the one stumbling over her words. Cadsuane shook her head in pitying style. If you want to see what a man is made of, push him from a direction he doesn't expect. There's good metal in that boy, I think, but he's going to be difficult. Steepling her fingers, she peered across them at the wall, musing to herself. He has a rage in him fit to burn the world, and he holds it by a hair. Push him too far off balance? Faugh. Althor's not so hard yet as Logain Ablar or Mazrim Taim, but 100 times as difficult, I fear. Hearing those three names together clove Marana's tongue to the roof of her mouth. You have seen Logain and Taim both? A staring Anura said. Taim, he is following Althor, so I hear. Marana managed to swallow a relieved sigh. Tales of Dumai's wells had not had time to spread yet. They would, though. I do have ears to catch rumors too, Anura, Cadsuane said acerbically, though I could wish I didn't for what I hear of that pair. All my work thrown away to be done over. Others as well, but I did my share. And then there are these black coats, these Ashaman. Taking a cup from Daigyan, she smiled warmly and murmured thanks. The round-cheeked wight seemed ready to curtsy, though all she did was retreat to a corner and fold her hands. She had been longer a novice and accepted than anyone in living memory, barely allowed to remain in the tower, gaining the ring by a fingernail and the shawl by an eyelash. Daigyan was always self-effacing around other sisters. Breathing the steam from her teacup, Cadsuane went on, suddenly chatting pleasantly. It was Logain, practically on my doorstep, that lured me away from my roses. Faugh. A scuffle at a sheep fair could have lured me from those light-cursed plants. What's the point if you use the power? But do it without, you grow 10,000 thorns for every... Faugh. I actually considered taking the oath as a hunter, if the Council of Nine would allow it. Well, it was a nice few months, chasing down Logain, but once he was taken, escorting him to Tarvalin appealed as much as the roses. I wandered a bit to see what I could find, perhaps a new warder, though it's a bit late for that in any fairness to the man, I suppose. Then I heard of Taim, and I was off to Saldaea as fast as I could ride. There's nothing for a bit of excitement like a man who can channel. Abruptly her voice hardened, and her gaze. Were either of you involved in that vileness right after the Aiel War? Despite herself, Marana gave a confused start. The other woman's eyes spoke of the block and the headsman's axe. What vileness? I don't know what you were talking about. That accusing glare hit Anura so hard she almost fell off the bed. The Aiel War? She gasped, steadying herself. The years after I spent trying to make the so-called Grand Coalition more than a name. Marana looked at Anura with interest. A good many of the Grey Aja had scurried from capital to capital after the war in a futile effort to hold together the alliance that had formed against the Aiel, but she had never known Anura was one of them. She could not be that bad a negotiator if she was. So did I, she said. Dignity. Since setting out after Althor from Camelin, she had not retained much of that. The few scraps remaining were too precious to lose. She made her voice calm and firm. What vileness do you mean, Cadsuane? The gray-haired woman simply waved the question away as though she had never spoken the word. For a moment, Marana wondered whether Cadsuane's wits might be wandering. She had never heard of it happening to a sister, but most Aes Sedai did go into retreat at the close of their lives, far from the stratagems and turbulence that none but sisters ever knew. Far from everyone, often as not. Who could say what befell them before the end? One look at the clear, steady gaze regarding her over that teacup quickly disabused her of any such notion. Anyway, 20-year-old vileness, whatever it had been, certainly could not hold a candle to what the world confronted now. And Cadsuane still had not answered her original questions. What did she intend? And why now? Before Marana could ask again, the door opened and Bera and Kiruna were herded in by Coriel Hovian, a boyishly slim yellow with thick black eyebrows and a mass of raven hair that gave her something of a wild appearance, no matter how neatly she dressed. And she always dressed for a country dance, with masses of embroidery on her sleeves and bodice and up the sides of her skirts. There was barely room to move with so many people in this confined space. Coriel never failed to seem amused, whatever happened, but now she wore a wide smile somewhere between disbelief and outright laughter. Kiruna's eyes flashed in a face of frozen arrogance, while Bera fumed, mouth tight and forehead creased, until they saw Cadsuane. Marana supposed that for them, it must be as if she had found herself face to face with Alin Daifella, or Sevlana Maso, or even Mabriam and Sherid. Their eyes bulged. Kiruna's jaw dropped. I thought you were dead, Bera breathed. Cadsuane sniffed irritably. I'm growing tired of hearing that. The next imbecile I hear it from is going to yelp for a week. Anura began studying the toes of her slippers. You'll never guess where I found these two, Coriel said in her lilting Murandian accent. She tapped the side of her upturned nose, the way she did when about to tell a joke, or what she saw as one. Spots of color appeared in Bera's cheeks, and larger in Kiruna's. Bera there was sitting meek as a mouse under the eyes of half a dozen of those Aiel wilders, who told me bold as you please that she couldn't come with me until Cerelia— oh, now that woman's a harridan to give you nightmares, she is. I couldn't have Bera until Cerelia was done with her private chat with the other apprentice, our darling Kiruna there. It was no longer a matter of spots. Kiruna and Bera reddened to their hair, refusing to meet anyone's eye. Even Daigyan stared at them. Relief surged through Marana in wonderful waves. She would not have to be the one to explain how the Wise Ones had interpreted that wretched Althor's orders that the sisters were to obey them. They were not really apprentices. There were no lessons involved, of course. What could a great lot of wilders, savages at that, teach Aes Sedai? It was just that the Wise Ones liked to know where everyone fit. Just. Bera or Kiruna could tell how Althor had laughed, and said it made no difference to him and he expected them to be obedient pupils. No one was having an easy time bending her neck, least of all Kiruna. Yet Cadsuane did not demand explanations. I expected a dog's dinner, she said dryly, but not a bucket from the midden. Let me see if I have the straight of it. You children who stand in rebellion against a lawfully raised Amerlin have now somehow associated yourselves with the Althor boy, and if you are taking orders from these Aiel women, I assume you take his as well. Her grunt was disgusted enough for a mouthful of rotten plums. Shaking her head, she peered into her teacup, then fixed the pair again. Well, what's one treason more or less? The Hall can put you on your knees from here to Tarmangaiden for penance. They can only take your heads once. What of the rest, out in the Aiel camp? All Elidas, I suppose. Have they also apprenticed themselves? None of us have been allowed as close as the first row of tents. These Aiel seem to have no love of Aes Sedai. I do not know, Cadsuane, Kiruna answered, so red-faced she appeared about to catch fire. We have been kept apart. Mirana's eyes widened. She had never before heard Kiruna sound deferential. Bera, on the other hand, drew a deep breath. She already stood straight, yet she seemed to straighten herself for an unpleasant task. Elida is not, she began heatedly. Elida is overambitious, as near as I can make out, Cadsuane broke in, leaning forward so abruptly that Mirana and Anura both started back on the bed, though she was not looking at them. And she may be a catastrophe simmering, but she is still the Amerlin seat raised by the hall of the tower in full accordance with the laws of the tower. If Elida is a lawful Amerlin, why have you not obeyed her order to return? All that betrayed Bera's lack of composure was the stillness of her hands on her skirts. Only a marked effort to keep from clutching or smoothing could hold them so motionless. So, one of you has a little backbone. Cadsuane laughed softly, but her eyes did not look mirthful at all. Leaning back, she sipped her tea. Now sit down. I have a great many more questions. Mirana and Anura rose, offering their places on the bed, but Kiruna simply stood peering at Cadsuane worriedly, and Bera glanced at her friend, then shook her head. Coriel rolled her blue eyes, grinning broadly for some reason, but Cadsuane did not seem to care. Half the rumors I hear, she said, concern the Forsaken being loose. It would hardly be a surprise with all else, but do you have any evidence? For or against? Before very long, Mirana was glad to be sitting. Before very long, she knew what laundry felt, going through the laundress's mangle. Cadsuane did all the questioning, dodging from topic to topic, so you never knew what was coming next. Coriel held her peace, except for chuckling now and then or shaking her head, and Daigyan did not even do that, of course. Mirana caught the worst, her and Bera and Kiruna, yet Anura was certainly not spared. Every time Berelane's advisor relaxed, thinking she was in the clear, Cadsuane skewered her anew. The woman wanted to know everything, from the Althor boy's authority with the Aiel to why a seafolk wave mistress was anchored in the river, from whether Moiraine truly was dead to whether the boy really had rediscovered traveling, and whether Berelane had bedded him or had any intention of it. What Cadsuane thought of the answers was impossible to say, except once, when she learned that Alana had bonded Althor and how. Her mouth compressed to a thin line and she frowned a hole through the wall, but while everyone else expressed disgust, Mirana thought of Cadsuane saying she had considered taking another warder herself. The answer was ignorance entirely too often to suit, but saying you did not know failed to quench Cadsuane's appetite. She required every last shred and particle you did know. Even if you did not know, you knew it. They managed to keep a little back, most of what had to be kept back, yet a few surprising things came out that way, some very surprising, even from Anura, who it turned out had been receiving detailed letters from Berelane almost from the day the girl rode north. Cadsuane demanded answers, but gave none, and that worried Mirana. She watched faces grow dogged and defensive and apologetic, and wondered whether her own looked the same. Cadsuane, she had to make one more effort. Cadsuane, why have you decided to take an interest in him now? An unblinking gaze met hers for a moment, then Cadsuane turned her attention to Bera and Kiruna. So they actually managed to kidnap him right out of the palace, the gray-haired woman said, holding out her empty cup for Daigyan to refill. No one else had been offered tea. Cadsuane's expression and tone were so neutral that Mirana wanted to tear her own hair. Althor would not be pleased if he learned Kiruna had revealed the kidnapping, however inadvertently. Cadsuane used any slip of your tongue to pry out more than you meant to say. At least the details of his treatment had not come out. He had made plain how displeased he would be if that happened. Mirana thanked the light that the woman was not staying with any one subject for long. You are sure it was Taim? And you are sure these black coats didn't arrive on horses? Vera answered reluctantly, and Kiruna sullenly. They were as certain as they could be. No one had actually seen the Ashaman come or depart, and the hole that brought them all here could have been made by Althor, which did not satisfy at all, of course. Think! You aren't silly girls any longer, or shouldn't be. Faugh! You must have noticed something. Marana felt ill. She and the others had spent half the night arguing over what their oath meant before deciding it meant exactly what they had said, with no loopholes to wriggle through. At last, even Kiruna conceded that they must defend and support Althor as well as obey, that standing aside in the slightest was not permitted. What that might mean when it came to Elida and the sisters loyal to her really concerned no one. At least, no one admitted any concern. The mere fact of what they had decided was stunner enough. But Marana wondered whether Bera or Kiruna had yet realized what she had. They might just find themselves opposing a legend, not to mention whatever sisters besides Coriel and Daigyan had chosen to follow her. Worse. Cadsuane's eyes rested on her for a moment, giving away nothing, demanding everything. Worse, Marana was sure that Cadsuane knew that very well. Hurrying along the palace corridors, Min ignored greetings from half a dozen maidens she knew, just trotted right by without a word in return, never considering that she was being rude. Trotting was not easy in heeled boots, the fool things women did for men. Not that Rand had asked her to wear the boots, but she put them on the first time with him in mind, and she had seen him smile. He liked them. Light. What was she doing thinking about boots? She should never have gone to Kola Vair's apartments. Shivering, blinking back unshed tears, she began to run. As usual, a number of maidens were squatting on their heels beside the tall doors worked with gilded rising suns. Their shufa hung about their shoulders, and their spears lay across their knees, yet there was nothing casual about them. They were leopards, waiting for something to kill. Usually maidens made Min uneasy, for all they were friendly enough. Today she would not have cared if they were veiled. He's in a foul temper, Rialin warned, but made no move to stop her. Min was one of the few allowed to enter Rand's presence without being announced. She straightened her coat and tried to settle herself. She was not sure why she had come, except that Rand made her feel safe. Burn him! She had never needed anyone to feel safe before. Just inside the room, she stopped, aghast. Automatically, she pushed the door shut behind her. The place was a shambles. A few glittering shards clung to some of the mirror frames, but most of the glass lay scattered across the floor. The dais was on its side, the throne that had stood atop it just gilded flinders where it had been smashed against a wall. One of the stand lamps, heavy iron beneath the gilt, had been twisted into a hoop. Rand sat in one of the smaller chairs in his shirt sleeves, arms dangling and head back, staring at the ceiling. Staring at nothing. Images danced about him and colored auras flickered and flared. He was like Aes Sedai in that. She had no need of illuminators when Rand or an Aes Sedai was in sight. He did not move as she walked farther into the room. He did not seem aware of her at all. Shattered bits of mirror crunched beneath her boots. A foul temper indeed. Even so, she felt no fear. Not of him. She could not begin to imagine Rand harming her. For him, she felt enough to nearly purge the memory of Kola Vair's apartments from her head. She had long since reconciled herself to being hopelessly in love. Nothing else mattered. Not that he was an unsophisticated countryman, younger than she, not who or what he was, not that he was doomed to go mad and die if he was not killed first. I don't even mind having to share him, she thought, and knew how tightly she was caught if she could lie to herself. That she had forced herself to accept. Elaine had a part of him, a claim on him, and so did this Avienda woman she had yet to meet. What could not be mended must be lived with, so her Aunt Jan always said, especially when your brains had gone soft. Light. She'd always prided herself on keeping her wits. She stopped beside one of the chairs, where the dragon's scepter had driven into the thick wooden back so hard that the point stood out nearly a hand behind. In love with a man who did not know, who would send her away should he ever become aware. A man she was sure was in love with her, and with Elaine, and this Avienda too. That she rushed by. What could not be mended. He was in love with her and refused to admit it. Did he think that just because Mad Lou's Theron Telamon had killed the woman he loved, he was fated to as well? "I'm glad you came," he said suddenly, still staring at the ceiling. "I've been sitting here alone. Alone." He gave a bitter bark of a laugh. "Herod Fell is dead." "No," she whispered. "Not that sweet little old man?" Her eyes stung. He was torn apart. Rand's voice was so tired, so empty. Idrian fainted when she found him. She lay in a stupor half the night and was nearly incoherent when finally roused. One of the other women at the school gave her something to make her sleep. She was embarrassed about that. When she came to me, she started crying again, and it had to be Shadowspawn. What else could tear a man limb from limb? Without raising his head, he smacked a fist down on the chair arm so hard the wood creaked. But why? Why was he killed? What could he have told me? Min tried to think. She truly did. Master Fell was a philosopher. He and Rand discussed everything from the meaning of parts of the prophecies of the dragon to the nature of the hole into the Dark One's prison. He let her borrow books, fascinating books, especially where she had to work to puzzle out what it was they said. He had been a philosopher. He would never lend her a book again. Such a gentle old man, wrapped up in a world of thought and startled when he noticed anything outside it. She treasured a note he had written to Rand. He had said she was pretty, that she distracted him, and now he was dead. Light. She had had too much of death. "I shouldn't have told you. Not like that." She gave a start. She had not heard Rand cross the room. His fingers brushed her cheek, wiping away tears. She was crying. "I'm sorry, Min," he said softly. "I am not a very nice person anymore. A man is dead because of me, and all I can do is worry why he was killed." Flinging arms around him, she buried her face against his chest. She could not stop crying. She could not stop trembling. "I went to Kola Vair's apartments." Images flashed in her head. The empty sitting room, all the servants gone, the bedchamber. She did not want to remember, but now she had begun, she could not stop the words tumbling out. "I thought, since you'd exiled her, maybe there was some way around the viewing I had of her." Kola Vair had been wearing what must have been her finest gown, dark silk that glistened with falls of delicate aged ivory Sovara lace. "I thought for once it didn't have to be that way. You're Taviran. You can change the pattern." Kola Vair had donned a necklace and bracelets of emeralds and fire drops, and rings with pearls and rubies, surely her best pieces, and yellow diamonds had been arranged in her hair, a fair imitation of the crown of Kyrian. Her face. She was in her bedchamber, hanging from one of the bedposts, bulging eyes and protruding tongue in a blackened, swollen face, toes a foot above the overturned stool. Sobbing helplessly, Min sagged against him. His arms went around her slowly, gently. "Oh, Min, you have more pain than pleasure from your gift. If I could take your pain, I would, Min. I would." Slowly it penetrated that he was trembling too. Light. He tried so hard to be iron, to be what he thought the dragon reborn must, but it cut him when somebody died because of him. Kola Vair probably no less than Fell. He bled for everyone harmed, and tried to pretend he did not. "Kiss me," she mumbled. When he did not move, she looked up. He blinked at her uncertainly, eyes now blue, now gray, a morning sky. "I'm not teasing." How often had she teased him, sitting on his lap, kissing him, calling him sheep herder because she dared not say his name for fear he might hear the caress. He put up with it because he thought she was teasing and would stop if she believed it did not affect him. Ha! Aunt Jan and Aunt Rana said you should not kiss a man unless you intended to marry him, but Aunt Myron seemed to know a little more of the world. She said you should not kiss a man too casually because men fell in love so easily. I'm cold inside, sheepherder. Colavire and Master Fell. I need to feel warm flesh. I need, please. His head lowered so slowly. It was a brother's kiss at first, mild as milk water, soothing, comforting. Then it became something else. Not at all soothing. Jerking upright, he tried to pull away. Min, I can't. I have no right. Seizing 2 handfuls of his hair, she pulled his mouth back down, and after a little while he stopped fighting. She was not certain whether her hands began tearing at the laces of his shirt first or his at hers, but of one thing she was absolutely sure. If he even tried to stop now, she was going to fetch one of Rialin's spears, all of them, and stab him. On her way out of the Sun Palace, Cadsuane studied the Aiel wilders she saw as well as she could without being obvious. Coriel and Daigyan followed in silence. They knew her well enough by now not to disturb her with chatter, which could not be said of all those who paused a few days at Aralin's little palace before she sent them on. A great many wilders, every one staring at the Aes Sedai as if at flea-ridden curs covered with running sores, tracking mud over a new rug. Some people looked at Aes Sedai with awe or adoration, others with fear or hate. But Cadsuane had never seen contempt before, not even from white cloaks. Even so, any people who produced so many wilders should be sending a river of girls to the tower. That would have to be seen to eventually, and the pit of doom with custom if need be, but not now. The Althor boy needed to be kept intrigued enough that he allowed her near him, and off balance enough that she could nudge him where she wanted without him realizing. One way or another, anything that might interfere with that must be controlled or suppressed. Nothing could be allowed to influence him or upset him in the wrong way. Nothing. The shiny black coach was waiting in the courtyard behind a patient team of 6 matched greys. A serving man rushed to open the door, painted with a pair of silver stars atop red and green stripes, bowing to the 3 of them till his bald head was nearly level with his knees. He was in shirt sleeves and breeches. Since coming to the Sun Palace, she had not noticed anyone in livery yet, except a few wearing Dobrain's colors. No doubt the servants were unsure what to wear and afraid to make a mistake. I may skin Elida when I can lay hands on her, she said as the coach lurched into motion. That fool child has made my task nearly impossible. And then she laughed so abruptly that Daigyan stared before she could control her eyes. Coriel's smile widened in anticipation. Neither understood, and she did not try to explain. All of her life, the fastest way to interest her in anything had been to tell her it was impossible. But then, over 270 years had passed since she last encountered a task she could not perform. Any day now might be her last, but young Althor would be a fitting end to it all. Chapter 20. Patterns within Patterns. Contemptuously, Savannah studied her dusty companions, seated in a circle with her in the small clearing. The nearly leafless branches overhead provided a bit of cool shade, and the place where Rand al'Thor had hurled death lay more than 100 miles to the west, yet the other women's eyes shifted with an air of looking over shoulders. Without sweat tents, none had been able to clean herself properly, no more than a hasty washing of face and hands at day's end. 8 small silver cups, all different, sat by her side on the dead leaves, and a silver pitcher filled with water that had been dented in the retreat. Either the Karakarn is not following, she said abruptly, or he has been unable to find us. Either contents me. Some of them actually jumped. Tion's round face paled, and Modara patted her shoulder. Modara would have been pretty if she was not so tall, if she did not always try to mother everyone within reach. Alaris became much too intent on straightening skirts already neatly spread around her attempting to ignore what she did not want to see. Mara's thin mouth drew down, but who could say whether for the other's open fear of the Karakarn or her own? They had reason to be afraid. 2 full days since the battle, and fewer than 20,000 spears had grouped around Savannah. Therava and most of the wise ones who had been to the west were still absent, including all the rest who were tied to her. Some of the missing surely were making their way back to Kinslayer's dagger, but how many would never again see the sun rise? No one remembered such a slaughter, so many dead in so short a time. Even the Algai de Siswai were not truly ready to dance the spears again so soon. Reason to be afraid, yet none for showing it, displaying heart and soul on your face like a wetlander, open and naked for all to see. Riala at least seemed to realize that much. If we are to do this thing, let us do it, she muttered, stiff with embarrassment. She was one who had jumped. Savannah took the small gray cube from her pouch and placed it atop the brown leaves in the middle of the circle. Somerin put her hands on her knees, leaning over to examine it until she appeared in danger of falling out of her blouse. Her nose nearly touched the cube. Intricate patterns covered every side, and close up you could see smaller patterns within the larger, and still smaller inside those, and a hint of what seemed smaller yet. How they could have been made, the tiniest, so fine, so precise, Savannah had no idea. Once she had thought the cube stone, but she was no longer certain. Yesterday she had dropped it accidentally on some rocks without marring one line of the carving, if it was carving. The thing must be a terangrial, that they knew. The smallest flow possible of fire must be touched lightly there, on what looks like a twisted crescent moon, she told them, and another there on the top, on that marked like a lightning bolt. Somerin straightened very quickly. What will happen then? Alaris asked, combing her hair with her fingers. It seemed an absent-minded gesture, but she always found ways to remind everyone that her hair was black instead of common yellow or red. Savannah smiled. She enjoyed knowing what they did not. I will use it to summon the wetlander who gave it to me. That much you told us already, Riala said in a sour voice, and Tian bluntly asked, how will it summon him? She might fear Randall Thor, but not a great deal else. Certainly not Savannah. Belinda lightly stroked the cube with one bony finger, her sun-bleached eyebrows drawn down. Maintaining a smooth face, Savannah irritably prevented her hands from fingering a necklace or adjusting her shawl. I have told you all you need to know. Considerably more than they needed, in her opinion, but it had been necessary. Otherwise, they would all be back with the spears and the other wise ones, eating hard bread and dried meat. Or rather, they would all be on the move eastward, watching for any sign of other survivors, watching for any sign of pursuit. With a late start, they might still cover 50 miles before halting. Words will not skin the boar, much less kill it. If you have decided to creep back to the mountains and spend your lives running and hiding, then go. If not, then do what you must, and I will do my part. Riala's blue eyes stared hot defiance, and Tian's gray. Even Modara looked doubtful. She and Somerin lay the most solidly in her grasp. Savannah waited, outwardly calm, unwilling to tell them again or ask. Inside, her stomach churned with anger. She would not be beaten because these women had pale hearts. If we must, Riala sighed at last. Accepting the absent Therava, she resisted most often, but Savannah had hopes of her. The spine that refused to bend at all was often the most malleable once it gave way. That was as true for women as men. Riala and the others turned their eyes to the cube, some frowning. Savannah saw nothing, of course. In fact, she realized that if they did nothing, they could claim the cube failed to work and she would never know. Abruptly, though, Somerin gasped, and Mara almost whispered, It draws more. Look, she pointed. Fire there, and earth and air and spirit filling the runnels. Not all of them, Belinda said. They could be filled many ways, I think. And there are places where the flows twist around something that is not there. Her forehead furrowed. It must be drawing the male part as well. Several drew back a little, shifting shawls, brushing skirts as though to rub away dirt. Savannah would have given anything to see, almost anything. How could they be such cowards? How could they let it show? Finally, Modara said, I wonder what would happen if we touched it with fire elsewhere. Power the call box too much or in the wrong way, and it may melt, a man's voice said out of the air. It could even The voice cut off as the other women surged to their feet, peering in among the trees. Alaris and Modara went so far as to draw their belt knives, though they had no need of steel when they had the one power. Nothing moved among the sun-streaked shadows, not so much as a bird. Savannah did not stir. She had believed perhaps a third of what the Wetlander had told her, not including this in truth, but she recognized Kadar's voice. Wetlanders always had more names, but that was all he had given. A man of many secrets, she suspected. Take your places again, she ordered, and put the flows back where they were. How can I summon him if you fear words? Riala swung around, mouth gaping and eyes incredulous, undoubtedly wondering how she knew they had stopped channeling. The woman was not thinking clearly. Slowly, uneasily, they settled in the circle again. Riala donned a flatter face than anyone else. So you are back, Kadar's voice said from the air. Do you have Althor? Something in his tone warned her. He could not know, but he did. She abandoned all she had prepared to say. No, Kadar, but we still must talk. I will meet you in 10 days where we first met. She could reach that valley in Kinslayer's dagger sooner, but she needed time to prepare. How did he know? Well that you told the truth, girl, Kadar murmured dryly. You will learn I do not like being lied to. Maintain the wayline for location, and I will come to you. Savannah stared at the cube in shock. Girl? What did you say? She demanded. Girl? She could not believe her ears. Riala very pointedly did not look at her, and Mayra's mouth twisted in a smile, awkward because so seldom used. Kadar's sigh filled the clearing. Tell your wise one to continue doing exactly what she is doing, nothing else, and I will come to you. The forced patience in his tone scraped like a griststone. When she had what she wanted from the Wetlander, she would dress him in Guy Shane white. No, in black. What do you mean you will come, Kadar? Silence answered. Kadar, where are you? Silence. Kadar? The others exchanged uneasy glances. Is he mad? Dion said. Alaris muttered that he must be, and Belinda angrily demanded to know how long they were to continue this nonsense. Until I say to stop, Savannah said softly, staring at the cube. A prickle of hope wormed through her chest. If he could do this, then surely he could deliver what he had promised. And maybe... She would not hope too much. She looked up through the branches that nearly met above the clearing. The sun still had a way to climb to its peak. If he has not come by midday, we will go. It was too much to expect they would not grumble. So we sit here like stones? Alaris tossed her head in a practiced way, sweeping all of her hair over one shoulder. For a Wetlander? Whatever he promised you, Savannah, Riala said with a scowl, it cannot be worth this. He is mad, Tion growled. Modara nodded toward the cube. What if he can still hear? Tion sniffed dismissively, and Somerin said, How should we care if a man hears what we say? But I do not relish waiting for him. What if he is like those Wetlanders in black coats? Belinda compressed her lips till they nearly matched Mayra's. Do not be ridiculous, Alaris sneered. Wetlanders kill such men on sight. Whatever the Algai de Siswai claim, that must have been the work of the Aes Sedai and Randall Thor. That name produced a pained silence, but it did not last. Kadar must have a cube like this one, Belinda said. He must have a woman with the gift to make it work. An Aes Sedai? Riala made a noise of disgust in her throat. If there are 10 Aes Sedai with him, let them come. We will deal with them as they deserve. Mayra laughed. a dry sound as narrow as her face. I think you almost begin to believe they did kill Desane.
Watch your tongue.
Riala snarled. Yes, Somarin murmured anxiously. Careless words might be heard by the wrong ears. Tion's laugh was short and unpleasant. The lot of you has less courage than one wetlander. Which made Somarin snap back, of course, and Modara too, and Mera spoke words that would have brought a challenge had they not been wise ones, and Ullery spoke harsher, and Belinda. Their squabbling irritated Savannah, though it guaranteed they would not conspire against her. But that was not why she raised a hand for silence. Riala frowned at her, opening her mouth, and in that moment they heard what she did. Something rustled in the dead leaves among the trees. No Aiel would make so much noise, even if any would approach wise ones unbidden, and no animal would come so near people. This time she rose to her feet with the others. Two shapes appeared, a man and a woman, breaking enough branches underfoot to wake a stone. Just short of the clearing they stopped, and the man bent his head slightly to speak to the woman. It was Kadar, in a nearly black coat with lace at his neck and wrists. At least he did not wear a sword. They seemed to be arguing. Savannah should have been able to hear something of their words, yet the silence was complete. Kadar stood nearly a hand taller than Modara, tall for a wetlander, or even for an Aiel, and the woman's head reached no higher than his chest. As dark of face and hair as he, and beautiful enough to tighten Savannah's mouth, she wore bright red silk, cut to expose even more of her bosom than Somarin showed. As if thinking of the woman called her, Somarin drew close to Savannah. The woman has the gift, she whispered without taking her eyes from the pair. She weaves a barrier. Pursing her lips, she added reluctantly, she is strong, very strong. From her, that meant something indeed. Savannah had never been able to understand why strength and the power did not count among wise ones, while being thankful that it did not for her own sake. But Somarin prided herself that she had never encountered a woman near as strong as she. By her tone, Savannah suspected this woman was stronger. Right then, she did not care whether the woman could move mountains or barely light a candle. She must be Aes Sedai. She did not have the face, yet some Savannah had seen did not. That must be how Kadar could put his hand on Terangrial. That was how he could find them and come. So soon, so quickly. Possibilities unfolded and hope grew. But between him and her, who commanded? Stop channeling into that, she ordered. He might still be able to hear through it. Riale gave her a look that did not stop short of pity. Somarin already did to Savannah. Nothing could spoil her mood. She smiled and said, very well. Remember what I said. Let me do all of the talking. Most of the others nodded. Riala sniffed. Savannah kept her smile. A wise one could not be made Guy Shane, but so many worn-out customs had been set aside already that others might follow. Kadar and the woman started forward, and Somarin whispered again. She still holds the power. Sit next to me, Savannah told her hastily. Touch my leg if she channels. How that galled, but she must know. She sat, folding her legs under, and the others joined her, leaving a space for Kadar and the woman. Somarin sat close enough that their knees touched. Savannah wished she had a chair. I see you, Kadar, she said formally, in spite of his insult. Sit, you and your woman. She wanted to see how the Aes Sedai reacted, but all she did was arch an eyebrow and smile lazily. Her eyes were as black as his, as black as a raven's. The other wise ones let a little coldness show. Had the Aes Sedai at the wells not allowed Randall Thor to break free, they surely would have killed or captured every one. This Aes Sedai must be aware of that, since Kadar plainly knew what had happened. Yet she looked anything but afraid. This is Mycia, Kadar said, lowering himself to the ground, a little short of the space left for him. For some reason, he did not like to come within arm's reach. Perhaps he feared knives. I told you to use a single wise one, Savannah, not 6. Some men might be suspicious. For some reason, he seemed amused. The woman, Mycia, paused in the act of smoothing her skirts under when he gave her name, glaring at him with a fury that should have stripped his hide away. Perhaps she had thought to keep her identity hidden. She said nothing, though. After a moment, she sat beside him, her smile returning so suddenly it might never have gone. Not for the first time, Savannah was thankful that Wetlanders wore their emotions on their faces. You have brought the thing that can control Randall Thor? She did not even glance at the pitcher of water. When he was so rude, why should she continue the forms? She did not remember him being so when they met before. Perhaps the Aes Sedai emboldened him. Kadar gave her a quizzical look. Why, when you do not have him? I will, she said levelly, and he smiled. So did Mycia. When you do, then. His smile shouted of doubt and disbelief. The woman's mocked. A black robe could be found for her, too. What I have will control him once he is taken, but it cannot overcome him. I won't risk him finding out about me until you have him secure. He did not appear shamed in the slightest by the admission. Savannah forced down a stab of disappointment. One hope gone, but others remained. Riala and Tion folded their hands and stared straight ahead, beyond the circle, beyond him. He was no longer worth listening to. Of course, they did not know everything. What of Aes Sedai? Can this thing control them? Riala and Tion stopped peering beyond the trees. Belinda's eyebrows twitched, and Mara actually looked at her. Savannah could have cursed their lack of self-control. Kadar was as blind as all Wetlanders, though. He threw back his head and laughed. Do you mean to say you missed Thor but captured Aes Sedai? You grabbed at the eagle and caught a few larks. Can you provide the same for Aes Sedai? She wanted to grind her teeth. Surely he had been properly courteous before. He shrugged. Perhaps, if the price is right. It was dust to him, of no moment. For that matter, Mycia showed no concern either. If she was Aes Sedai, but she must be. Your tongue tosses bright colors on the wind, Wetlander, Tion said in a flat voice. What proof of them have you? For once, Savannah did not mind that she had spoken out of turn. Kadar's face tightened for all the world as if he were a clan chief, as if he had heard the insult. But in an instant, he was all smiles once more. As you wish. Mycia, play with the call box for them. Somerin shifted her skirts, pressing her knuckles against Savannah's thigh as the gray cube rose a pace into the air. It bounced back and forth as though tossed from hand to hand, then tilted and spun on one corner like a top, faster and faster until it blurred. Would you like to see it balance on her nose? Kadar asked with a toothy grin. Tight-eyed, the dark woman stared straight ahead, her smile clearly forced now. I think I have demonstrated quite enough, Kadar, she said coldly. But the cube, the call box, continued whirling. Savannah waited a slow count of 20 before saying, That is sufficient. You may stop now, Mycia, Kadar said. Put it back where it was. Only then did the cube slowly descend, nestling gently on its original spot. Dark as she was, the woman looked pale and furious. Had she been alone, Savannah would have laughed and danced. As it was, she had difficulty maintaining a smooth face. Riala and the others were too busy staring disdainfully at Mycia to notice. What worked on one woman with the gift would work on another. No need with Somerin and Modara, perhaps, but Riala and Therava. She could not appear too eager, not when the others knew there were no Aes Sedai captives. Of course, Kadar went on, it will take a little time to provide you with what you wish. He took on a sly look, trying to hide it. Perhaps another Wetlander would not have seen. I warn you, the price will not be small. In spite of herself, Savannah leaned forward. And the way you traveled here so quickly? How much to make her teach us that? She managed to keep eagerness from her voice, but she was afraid the contempt she felt came through. Wetlanders would do anything for gold. Perhaps the man heard it. His eyes certainly widened in surprise before he could regain control, such as it was. He studied his hands, and his mouth curled faintly. Why should his smile seem pleased? That is not something she does, he said in a voice as smooth as his palms. Not by herself. It is like the call box. I can provide you with several, but the price of those is even higher. I doubt what you've gleaned from Kyrian will be enough. Fortunately, you can use the traveling boxes to take your people to richer lands. Even Mara was hard-pressed to keep her expression from becoming too avid. Richer lands, and no need to make a way through those fools following Randall Thor. Tell me more, Savannah said coolly. Richer lands might be of some interest. Not enough to make her forget the Karakarn, though. Kadar would give her everything he had promised before she declared him Datsang. As well that he seemed to like wearing black. There would be no need to give him any gold then.
The Watcher ghosted through the trees, making no sound. It was wonderful what you could learn with a call box, especially in a world where there seemed to be only two others. That red dress was easy to follow, and they never looked back even to see whether some of those so-called Aiel were trailing them. Grendel maintained the mask of mirrors that hid her true form, but Samael had dropped his, golden-bearded again, and just head and shoulders taller than she. He had let the link between them dissolve, too. The Watcher wondered whether that was wise under the circumstances. He'd always wondered how much of Samael's vaunted bravery was really stupidity and blindness. But the man did hold Saidin. Perhaps he was not completely unaware of his danger. The Watcher followed and listened. They had no idea. The true power, drawn directly from the Great Lord, could neither be seen nor detected except by who wielded it. Black flecks floated across his vision. There was a price, to be sure, one that grew with each use, but he had always been willing to pay the price when it was necessary. Being filled with the true power was almost like kneeling beneath Shale Ghul, basking in the Great Lord's glory. The glory was worth the pain. Of course I've had to have you with me, Samael growled, stumbling over a dead vine. He had never really been at home away from the cities. You answered 100 questions for them just being there. I can hardly believe that silly girl herself actually suggested what I wanted. He barked a laugh. Perhaps I'm Taviran myself. A branch that partially blocked Grendel's path flexed away until it snapped with a sharp crack. For a moment, it hung in the air as if she intended to strike her companion. That silly girl will cut out your heart and eat it, given half a chance. The branch flew aside. I have a few questions of my own. I never thought you would keep your truce with Althor any longer than you must. But this... The Watcher's eyebrows rose. A truce? A claim as risky as it was false, by all evidence. I didn't arrange his kidnapping. Samael gave her what he probably thought was a wry look. His scar made it more a snarl. Mesana had a hand in it, though. Maybe Dimandred and Cimarag as well, despite how it ended. But Mesana, certainly. Perhaps you ought to reconsider what you think the Great Lord means about leaving Althor unharmed. Grendel considered that, so much so that she tripped. Samael caught her by the arm, keeping her on her feet, but as soon as she regained her balance, she jerked free. Interesting, even given what had happened back in that clearing. Grendel's real interest was always the most beautiful, plucked from among the most powerful. But she would have flirted, just to pass an hour, with a man she intended to kill, or one who wanted to kill her. The only men she never flirted with were those of the Chosen who stood above her for a time. She never accepted being the lesser of any pair. Then why continue with them? Her voice dripped molten lava, although normally she had exquisite control over her emotions. Althor in Masana's hands is one thing. Althor in this savage's is something else. Not that you'll have much chance at him if you really intend sending them off to loot. Traveling boxes? What is your game there? Do they hold captives? If you think I will teach them compulsion, erase it from your mind. One of those women was not negligible. I will not risk strength and skill residing together in her, or in someone she teaches. Or do you have a binder hidden away with your other toys? For that matter, where were you earlier? I do not like having to wait. Samael stopped, glancing behind them. The watcher stood very still. Swathed in fan cloth, except for his eyes, he had no worry that he would be seen. Over the years, he had learned expertise in many areas Samael scorned. In some he favored, too. The gateway opening suddenly, slicing away half of a tree, made Grendel jump. The split trunk leaned drunkenly. Now she also knew Samael held to the source. Do you think I was telling them the truth? Samael said mockingly. Small increases in chaos are as important as large. They will go where I send them, do as I wish, and learn to be satisfied with what I give them. As will you, Macia. Grendel let her illusion fade and stood golden-haired as he, as fair as she had been dark. If you call me that again, I will kill you. Her voice held even less expression than her face. She meant it. The watcher tensed. If she tried, one of the two would die. Should he interfere? Black flecks sped across his eyes. Faster, faster. Samael met her stare with one just as hard. Remember who will be nameless, Rendal, he said, and stepped through his gateway. For a moment, she stood looking at the opening. A vertical silver slash appeared off to one side, but before her gateway began to align, she let go the weave, slowly, the streak shrinking to a point before winking out. The prickling vanished from the watcher's skin as she released Sayadar as well. With a fixed face, she followed Samael, and his gateway closed behind her. The watcher smiled crookedly behind his fan-cloth skulker's mask. Nameless. That explained what had brought Grendel to heel, what had stayed her from killing Samael. Even she would be blinded by that. An even greater risk for Samael than claiming truce with Luce Theron, though. Unless, of course, it was true. The Great Lord delighted in setting his servants one against another to see who was stronger. Only the strongest could stand near his glory. But today's truth need not be tomorrow's. The Watcher had seen truth change 100 times between a single sunrise and sunset. More than once he had changed it himself. He considered going back and killing the 7 women in the clearing. They would die easily. He doubted they knew how to form a true circle. The black flecks filled his eyes, a horizontal blizzard. No. He would let that run its course. For now. To his ears, the world screamed as he used the true power to rip a small hole and step outside the pattern. Samael did not know how truly he spoke. Small increases in chaos could be every bit as important as large. Chapter 21. Swovan Night. Night came slowly over Ebudar, the glow of the white buildings resisting darkness. Small knots and bunches of Swovan Night revelers with little sprigs of evergreen in their hair danced in the streets beneath the bright three-quarter moon, few carrying so much as a lantern as they gamboled to the music of flutes and drums and horns that drifted from inns and palaces, dancing their way from one set of festivities to another. But for the most part, the streets lay empty. A distant dog barked, and another, closer, answered furiously until it suddenly yelped and fell silent. Balanced on his toes, Matt listened, eyes searching the moon shadows. Only a cat moved, slinking along the street. The slap of running bare feet faded. The owner of one pair should be staggering, and the other bleeding. As he bent, his foot kicked a club as long as his arm on the paving stones. Heavy brass studs shone in the moonlight. That would have broken his skull for sure. Shaking his head, he wiped his knife on the ragged coat worn by the man at his feet. Open eyes stared at the night sky from a dirty, creased face. A beggar, by the look and smell of him. Matt had not heard of beggars attacking people, but maybe times were harder than he thought. A large jute sack lay near one outstretched hand. The fellows certainly had been optimistic about what they would find in his pockets. The thing could have covered him from head to knees. To the north, above the city, light suddenly burst in the sky with a hollow boom as glittering streaks of green expanded in a ball, and then another eruption showered red sparkles through the first, then a blue and a yellow. Illuminator's night flowers, not as spectacular as they would have been in a moonless, cloudy sky, yet still they took his breath. He could watch fireworks till he fell over from hunger. Nelesian had spoken of an illuminator. Light, was that only this morning? But no more night flowers came. When illuminators made the sky bloom, as they said, they planted more than 4 flowers. Plainly, someone with coin had made a purchase for Swovan night. He wished he knew who. An illuminator who would sell night flowers would sell more than that. Slipping the knife back up his sleeve, he gathered his hat from the pavement and walked away hurriedly, his boots echoing, a sound empty as the street. Most shuttered windows here showed not a glimmer of light. A better place for murder probably could not be found in the city. The entire encounter with the 3 beggars had lasted only a minute or 2 and had been seen by no one. In this city you could find 3 or 4 fights in a day if you were not careful, but the odds of facing 2 sets of robbers in one day seemed about as great as the odds of the civil guard refusing a bribe. What was happening to his luck? If only those bloody dice would stop rolling in his head. He did not run, but he did not dawdle either, one hand on a hilt beneath his coat and an eye open for anyone moving in the shadows. He saw nothing but a few clumps of people cavorting along the street, though. In the common room of the Wandering Woman, the tables had been cleared away except for a few near the walls. The flutists and the drummer made shrill music for 4 laughing lines of people doing what appeared to be half pattern dance and half jig. Watching, he copied a step. Outland merchants in fine woolens leaped right along with locals in brocaded silk vests or those useless coats slung on their shoulders. He marked out 2 of the merchants for the way they moved, one slender and one not, yet both with a light grace, and several local women wearing their best, the deep necklines outlined by a little lace or a great deal of embroidery, but none in silk. Not that he would refuse to dance with a woman in silk, of course. He had never turned down a dance with any woman of any age or station. But the rich were in the palaces tonight, or the homes of the wealthier merchants and moneylenders. Those folk near the walls, catching their breath for the next dance, had their faces buried in mugs as often as not, and were snatching fresh mugs from trays carried by scurrying serving women. Mistress Annan would likely sell as much wine tonight as in an ordinary week. Ale, too. The local folk must have no taste to their tongues. Trying another step of the dance, he caught Kyra as she tried to hurry by with a tray, pitching his voice loud above the music to ask a few questions, and finishing with an order for his dinner. Gilded fish, a tangy dish that Mistress Annan's cook prepared to perfection. A man needed his strength to keep up in the dance. Kyra flashed a sultry smile at a fellow in a yellow vest who grabbed a mug from her tray and dropped his coin on it, but for once she had no smile for Matt. In fact, she managed to compress her mouth to a thin line, no small feat. "Your little rabbit, am I?" With a telling sniff, she went on impatiently. "The boy is tucked into his bed where he should be, and I don't know where Lord Nelesian is, or Harnan, or Master Vannon, or anybody else. And cook says she won't fix anything but soup and bread for those as are drowning their tongues in wine. Though why, my lord, wants gilded fish when he has a